so I can't speak in the loud voice anymore with this on. And it gave me an appreciation for Jesus, who spoke the whole Sermon on the Mount in a loud voice. To how did he do that? You know, maybe I think about in the ancient times, 100, 200 years ago, when preachers would preach outdoors to people, 25,000, they said during the revivals that they were having. How'd they speak in those loud voices for so long? Certainly we're not trained to do that. Over the next 3 weeks, I want to give you sort of a tour of Israel, and I debated about how am I going to do that. I'm going to do that with chronology, starting with Abraham and going through his travels and back and forth, or am I going to do it geographically? And I decided to do it geographically, basically from north to south, if you will. But that means that the different things that happen at different places come in different places in the Bible. And so on the handouts, I've tried to give you a place where you could go through and look at those scriptures yourself when this is over. And maybe if you can remember where we are on the map or look it up in your Bible map, it might give you a little bit better feeling for what's there. And then I've tried to throw some, not just the maps, but the pictures of things that are there so that you can sort of get a feel for it. If we look at the land of Israel, can we see this fairly well? This is taken from Rose Publications' Then and Now maps. And so the outline is basically from then, but if you see the red lines along the way, what you see is how it's divided up now. And so we have Israel on the coast, but if you see the red line where it says Samaria and Judea, that's all what's called the West Bank. And the West Bank is a part of what Israel took in the 1967 war. The Palestinians live in the West Bank, although the Jews are putting a lot of settlements there. That calls for some political trouble. Wait, or is that supposed to be happening? The Palestinians say no, the Israelis say yes. They're taking over the West Bank, if you will. And so many of the biblical sites, say like Bethlehem and Jericho, those are in the West Bank. On the other side of the river is Jordan. This time we went to Jordan and saw some things that I'll share with you, but most of those are in the south country. As we go on up north, we see Syria and Lebanon. And then right between Israel, Syria, and Lebanon are the Golan Heights. If you see the area up just to the left of where it says Tetrarchy of Philip, the red lines around there, that was taken by Israel from Syria during the war, and the 67 war. And so they took the West Bank from Jordan. Jordan said, you can have it. We don't want it anymore. Syria would still maybe like to have the Golan Heights. Israel really doesn't want to give up the Golan Heights because it's a lot of mountainous country, and you can place cannons on top of those mountains and shoot over into Israel. And so Israel wasn't really crazy about giving up the Golan Heights. It also has on the Sea of Galilee, if you see that it's part of the Sea of Galilee, and would give fishing rights there, and Israel didn't really want to give that up. But Syria these days has all kinds of problems of their own, the war that's going on in Syria, so that's not really a question anymore. So a little bit about modern politics. if you will, and I'm not going to talk much more about modern politics, but I want you to see where things are, if you will. And so up to the north, if you see the two big lakes, the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, connected by the Jordan River. And so we want to look first. I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to work from north to south, but I'm going to start in the middle with the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is actually a lake. It's called a sea, but it's actually a lake, 11 miles by 7.5 miles, if you will. The Jordan River flows down from the mountain country into the lake and then on down. Now, in the past, the Jordan was a very wide river, but this is no longer true. The Israelis have dammed up the Sea of Galilee, and they just let a little bit of water go down into the Jordan. There's a spring that feeds the Jordan, and especially as we come to the south and I come to the baptismal site of Jesus, Bethany, across the Jordan, I'll show you pictures of how wide the Jordan is now, probably from here to the gentleman in the wheelchair. That's all the wide it is at wide spots in the Jordan. You can basically wade across the Jordan River now. And if you look at the flood plain for the Jordan, it was much wider than that in the springtime when things melted in the past. But Israel gets 70% of the water, and Jordan gets 30% of the water, and they use it for agricultural irrigation, and the Jordan River is drying up, which means that the Dead Sea is drying up, because the Jordan River used to keep the Dead Sea full, but now if you go online and Google the Dead Sea, you'll find pictures of what the Dead Sea used to look like and what the Dead Sea looks like today, and there's a lot more dry land there now than what there used to be. The Sea of Galilee has 4 names in the Bible. It's not only Sea of Galilee, but the Sea of Kinnereth, the Sea of Gennesaret. If you look at those are actually the same name, one in the Old Testament translated from the Hebrew, one in the New Testament translated from the Greek, and then the Sea of Tiberias. And it's a beautiful lake there, a couple of pictures, picture looking out from the Mount of Beatitudes, and in the lower left corner you see the picture of a boat that was found as the sea went down one year. They discovered a first century boat, not a big fishing boat, a small fishing boat, but someone who was a great entrepreneur decided that if we take that boat as a model and we blow it up and make it bigger, we can make tourist fishing boats and give tourist rides on the Sea of Galilee in a boat that looks like the kind of fishing boats that Jesus and his disciples might have been in. And so if you go to Israel, I know Mike Moss would like to take some of you to Israel. He goes there when every other year if he can get enough people involved. By the way, I should say that at the end of this tour, I went this tour with Everett Hufford from Harding Grad School, and at the end of the tour, there were, I guess there were 85 people that went with him, and he asked, did anybody feel afraid while we were there? And the answer was a unanimous no. No, you know, you hear all kinds of things, but quite frankly, if you listen to the news, America seems to be a dangerous place to be too. And so the news, you know, makes things sound like it's really dangerous. Maybe we live in a dangerous country. And so seriously, this was a great experience. I hope you will think about going and visiting and seeing things and getting to ride on the Sea of Galilee. That's a wonderful, wonderful experience. The major city today on the Sea of Galilee is Tiberias. And so that's, if you see where the map is pointing on the southwest side of the Sea of Galilee, this major city of Tiberias, it's the modern city. There's a lot of ruins around to visit from the ancient times, but Tiberias seems to be the place where people live. There are some kibbutz areas where people live, but certainly Tiberias is a tourist city, if you will. A lot of hotels right along the sea, and beautiful place to visit. That was there in Jesus' time, but there's no record in Scripture of Jesus ever having visited that. That was more of a pagan city, if you will, not really a Jewish city. Here's a couple of views from the Sea of Tiberias, and you can see the hotels along the coast there, and a nice place. Well, I'm going to move north, if you will, up to the very top of the Golan Heights. And this is where Caesarea Philippi was. We read in Scripture about that this was where Peter confessed that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. But one of the interesting things to me about Caesarea Philippi is that it's basically a pagan city. It was today, well, in the past and today even called Banyas, after the god Pan, and the Arabic mispronunciation of Pan, the Greek god. And so Herod Philip built a palace there. You can see some of the ruins of his palace on the screen. And so he named it after Caesar. Philip was the tetrarch of that region in the northeast part of the Sea of Galilee that was given to him, and he built a city to honor Caesar up there. There, if you look on the right hand, you see up against the cliffs a number of pagan temples that are there. The Temple of Pan and the Temple of Goats and Temple of all kinds of gods that were worshipped up against the thing, which struck me as a little bit strange that Jesus goes there to ask Peter, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, they say that you're John the Baptist come back to life, or that you are Jeremiah, or you're Elijah, one of the other prophets. Well, who do you say that I am? Oh, you're the Son of God. You're the Messiah. And so here in this pagan place, a beautiful place, if you see the water that's there, we're close to Mount Hermon, that tall mountain that gets snow on it, and the snow melt feeds the area. Northern Israel reminds me a lot of West Virginia. Southern Israel reminds me a lot of Arizona. Southern Arizona. Northern Arizona is not that bad, but Southern Arizona, if you heard that was getting 120 down in Phoenix the other day, and but northern Israel up and around Caesarea, Dan, those are beautiful places, if you will. But Jesus was there with his disciples. Moving over a little bit to the west is the northernmost city of Israel, which is Dan. Israel was defined as from Dan to Beersheba. And Beersheba in the south, Dan in the north. Dan is originally a city that was called Laish. And so the book of Judges tells about how some of the men from Dan who were having problems. Dan was given land that was out toward the seacoast, but that's where the Philistines lived. And they had trouble with the Philistines, and they decided to migrate. And they migrated all the way to Laish in the north, killed off the people there, and rebuilt the city. And they named it after their ancestor, Dan. Now, here you see the gates of Dan. On the left, you see my left, your left. I point this way, but it's actually that way on the screen, right? And I'm looking at the screen on the back. So on your left, you see the gates of Laish that they've discovered. And built out of clay, out of brick. That was buried for years, and it's been an archaeological dig uncovered. But on the right, you see the gates of Dan, built out of stone. Later building. Notice, if you will, so let me go to the next slide. In the front of the city, you have an altar. And a lot of times it was an altar would be built to the gods right out by the city gates. Perhaps you remember in the book of Acts that Paul and Barnabas went to, they healed a man at the city gates at Lystra, and the priest of Zeus brought out an animal to sacrifice there at the city gates. It was common to have an altar at the city gates. But I want you to notice the city gates. I think that this was one of the things in traveling to Israel that really struck me. I had always imagined gates like, you go up to a fence and you open the gate, if you will. But city gates were actually a room that was in the wall and a place where you go in. And for a lot of the gates, even the gates in modern day, the old city of Jerusalem, you go in one way, but you don't go straight through. You turn and go, once you're inside the building to get into the city, you turn and go to your right or to your left. Why is that? So an invading army, if they knock down the doors with a giant log or a siege engine, you can't just go straight through. You'd have to turn your siege engine, and there's not room to really turn it inside the gates, you see. And people on the top, so they can't run through, straight through. But in the city gates, if you notice where it says the seats, and over on the side are seats there inside the building along the side. In the book of Ruth, you read about how that business was negotiated there in the city gates. It would be in that room as you go, and there's seats around the side, and the elders of the city sit in the city gates to conduct the business of the city. And so I think that was different. I think I'd imagined a white picket fence with folding chairs outside. Don't know where that came from. But the city gates, we no longer have the city gates of Bethlehem where Boaz negotiated that, but you can see that at Dan, the city gates. Dan was at the northernmost place. Jeroboam, when he became king of Israel, perhaps you remember the story that when Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took over the kingdom. And people came to him and asked them to reduce the taxes. Now that's a common kind of request, right? But Rehoboam first asked his father's older advisors, and they said, yes, do what the people say, but it didn't seem to make him a strong man. And he asked his fellow young people that he grew up with, and they said, you should be strong. And say that, no, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. I'm not going to do what you ask. And most of the tribes left him. He was left with Judah, with Benjamin. Later the Levites left and came to the south to Judah. But most of the tribes went after Jeroboam to become king. Jeroboam got worried that people are going to go back to Jerusalem to worship, which was on the border between Benjamin and Judah. And so he said, I will build places of worship. And in the south, toward the south of Israel, he built Bethel. Toward the north, Dan. And he built temples there. One of the amazing things to me is that there is no longer a foundation for the main temple that was there in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount on which that temple was built is still there. But the foundation's gone. But the foundations for the temple in Dan is still there. He set up a golden calf in Bethel, a golden calf in Dan, and that temple, if you see on the right-hand side, is the temple, the foundation of the temple, stairs that go up to the temple where the golden calf would have been in the temple, the altar area right in front of the temple, and so that's still there. You can look out on the right-hand picture. If you look beyond that tree, you're looking at Lebanon. That's about as far north in Israel today as you can go, and then you go on to Israel. But the country of Dan is a beautiful country. If you see the trees, the water running, flowing there, it flows on down into the Jordan River, flows down into the Sea of Galilee. The sound of rushing water. It's a beautiful, beautiful country there. We moved south from Dan to Hatzor. I used to call that Hazor, if you will, and I think in our Bibles, you read it, and in English you pronounce it Hazor. But then I discovered that when I was in Israel, that the Z is really a German Z. The German Z is pronounced like a TS, and it's actually a TS sound in Hebrew, and so it's Hatzor is the pronunciation. Hatzor was the capital of the north when Joshua brought his forces into the land of Canaan. They burned a number of cities in the south as they took over the cities, but then when they went to the north, Hatzor was the only city that they burned there. And but later Solomon built that up into one of the major cities. Looking at Hatzor here in your upper left, you see the city gates. Now these city gates go straight through, and Solomon gates had 6 chambers on 3 on each side, if you will, and so the top is no longer there on the city gates. You see on the top right hand the water supplies for the city. The way that water supplies work, Hatzor was destroyed many different times. not just by Joshua, but by a number of times. It sits out there in the plain. And so what you do is you build the new city on top of the ruins of the old city. That one's destroyed. You build a city on top of the ruins of that city. You build the next city on top of that ruins. And after a while, you have what's called a tell, which is sort of a mountain, if you will, which makes the new city that gets built more defensible because it's up high. And invaders would have to go uphill in order to conquer it. And you build the city walls on the top of that city. But the water is down low. The original spring where the city was built is down low. So what do? Oh, you dig this giant hole, if you will, in order to go down to get to the spring. And so if we think about a well, I think about something, maybe this big as a big well. If you remember a few years ago in Odessa, there was a child that got caught in a well, and it was only the size for a child. A man couldn't go down in it. But what happens to wells in the ancient world? Well, if you've got to go down to the bottom to the spring, you dig a great big area and you build stairs in it so that you can go down, and you go down in a spiral down to where the spring is and find the water system there at Hatzor. An interesting way. That's not just at Hatzor. We'll see that at other places, Megiddo, at Beersheba, wherever the city gets built up, then you have to dig down to get to your water. And water is something that's very important. Both times that I've been, in 2010 here and again in 2017, going with Dr. Hufford, he's taken us by Gamla, or Gamla, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's over in the Golan Heights. It's not mentioned in the Bible. It is mentioned in the writings of Josephus. It was one of the fortifications that the Jews had when they fought against Rome in the years 66 to 73, Jerusalem being destroyed in the middle of that in 70. By the way, I might mention in passing that people are talking about, there's going to be a 7-year tribulation period in which the temple is going to be destroyed in the middle of that. If they don't know history, that actually happened from 66 to 73, that 7-year tribulation period, and Jerusalem, the temple, was destroyed in the middle in 70. And so sometimes I call that it's grocery store theology. You go to the grocery store and you find on the rack these books that talk about what's going to happen in the future. They don't know what happened in the past, and that it's already taken place. But Gamla was one of those places that was heavily defensible. It's named after, if you hear the similarity between Gamla and camel, how it sounds, it's because if you see in the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, in the upper left-hand corner, I apparently don't know my right from my left, in the upper left-hand corner, that mountain that looks sort of like a camel's back, and they built a city on that. You see the synagogue that they've uncovered, first century synagogue in the upper right-hand corner. The lower left, from that thing, as you can see all the way to the Sea of Galilee. In fact, on a very clear day, we weren't there on a clear day, on a very clear day you can see all the way to Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. I've thrown the picture in on the lower right to show you more what the territory in the Golan Heights is like. It's apparently there is sometimes when the grass turns green, but every time I've been there, it's been looks like Texas, and so that coming on down close to the Sea of Galilee is a Iron Age, the ruins of an Iron Age city. It's been identified as being from the kingdom of Geshur. Geshur is mentioned in the Bible. The daughter of the king of Geshur was one of the wives of David, and had a son, Absalom, and Tamar, his sister. And so Amnon, perhaps you remember that story, had raped his half-sister Tamar, and Absalom got vengeance by killing Ammon when his brother who had raped his sister. So he fled to his grandfather, who was in the kingdom of Geshur. Geshur was in the northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee. And so we see, for example, here's the gates of the city. It's an Iron Age city from the time of David, Solomon on down. It was inhabited on down through the Roman period. Once again, on the right-hand side, you see an altar there by the city gates, and sort of a common thing that we will see where the gods were worshipped. This was a pagan god. Geshur is a Aramaic kingdom that was there. In modern times, that has also been identified as the city of Bethsaida. Peter, Andrew, Philip were from the city of Bethsaida. That's questionable. Mike Moss tells me that in his visits to Israel, they showed him one place and said it was Bethsaida, and now they're showing him another place and saying it's Bethsaida. I was reading last night the atlas that Carta puts out, the Sacred Bridge, and the writers of that atlas are disputing that this is actually Bethsaida. For one thing, it's too high. It's about 7 meters above the highest level at the supposed port's about 7 meters higher than what the Sea of Galilee ever was. It's built up on a tell, if you will. And Josephus says that the city of Bethsaida was turned into a Roman city. And you will see, as we go through, some Roman cities, some evidence of some Roman cities at Sepphoris, at Bethshan. But I didn't see, as I looked over here, any evidence of this ever having been a Roman city. And so my suspicions is that there's another tourist trap that's going to be found to be made into Bethsaida later on. But I do think this is part of Geshur, if interesting there. We come on down around on the Sea of Galilee to the west, and we come to the city of Capernaum. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, but in his ministry he moved over to the Sea of Galilee, to Capernaum on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, and there he taught in their synagogue. In these pictures you see on the left-hand side a building that has been identified as the house of Peter's mother-in-law. If you remember that the Gospels tell about how that as Jesus was preaching, he came to the house of where Peter was living. His mother-in-law was there. She was sick, and Jesus healed her. She got up and served Jesus. there have been churches after churches after churches built on top of this site. And today, if you sort of see in that picture, the bottom of a church that's built on stilts is built above that site. And so the whole thing is shade. That's nice to find an area of shade there. But that's a church on stilts above this particular city. On the right-hand side, you see some of the ruins, and looking out over the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is by the Sea of Galilee. There's a synagogue that's the ruins of a synagogue there, a 4th century synagogue that's built on the 1st century, the foundation of the 1st century synagogue, which was destroyed. If in the upper right corner you see the dark blocks, which are the foundation for the 1st century synagogue, the light-colored blocks, which are the walls of the 4th century synagogue, the upper left picture is the front of the synagogue looking from Peter's mother-in-law's house. And then the two bottom pictures are the inside of the synagogue. Notice there's pillars in there helping to hold up the ceiling, but on either side are benches. And in the very center, the lower center, I have a picture of the seat that is right by the door as you go in. Jesus talked about how the Pharisees loved the chief seats in the synagogue, and it was a marble seat that was right there, a little bit higher than the other seat. But you see, if you sit in the chief seat in the synagogue, everybody who comes in the door, you want to get there early so everybody sees that you were at synagogue. And so they come in the door and they see you. And so the important people want to sit right by the door to be seen. Everybody knows that they were at church, you see. And coming on down south, we come to the city of Magdala. Mary Magdalene is from Magdala. I take it that Magdala means tower, and unless she was a very tall woman, that she was called Magdalene, but most people suppose it's because she was from Magdala, which is a city on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. There was a church that they bought some land and they were going to build a hotel there. And they started digging and they dug up a 1st century synagogue. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of that synagogue as they've had to move where they were putting the hotel. The hotel is going up. You can see it in the lower left-hand corner behind the runs, more runs on the right-hand side. But notice they found in the center of the synagogue, they found a table that has a drawing of menorah. Today, the symbol of Israel is the Star of David. But in the ancient world, the symbol of Israel was the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick, if you will. And the synagogue was covered with mosaics, patterns in the floor. There, the center picture is a picture which I'm thinking, yeah, you can't see it well. But beautiful mosaics. Mosaics are found all over the ruins of Israel. Mosaic is where you take these little bitty pieces and you put them in and make some beautiful pictures. Although the Jewish synagogue just had patterns, if you will, not so much patterns. Going inland, we come to Nazareth, which is the boyhood home of Jesus, where Mary and Joseph lived before they went south to Bethlehem. It was a city of no, well, I spoke wrong. It's not a city. It was a village of no significance. If you go through the Old Testament and all these names of the cities that we aren't even quite sure where they were, Nazareth didn't even mention the Old Testament. It was on the side of a mountain with caves there and houses that are built over caves so that you've got a cool spot in the house. And so just a small village, if you will, an insignificant thing. We find in the Gospel of John, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? It's just a wide spot in the side of the hill. Today, it's a major city in Israel. Why? Oh, because Jesus was born there. And so that, I would say Jesus grew up there. He wasn't born there. He was born in Bethlehem. And so there is a Church of Christ there in Nazareth. Everett Hufford and his wife Eileen worked as missionaries there for about 5 years. And so when we go to Israel with him, he always plans a Sunday in Nazareth to go to church there. That's the upper left-hand corner. In the upper right-hand corner, you see a Catholic church that's built, the Basilica of the Annunciation, built over the house where supposedly Mary's house. I can't tell you exactly whether it was Mary's house or not, but there's been church buildings built over this spot. There wasn't a lot of houses there to build a church building over, so it very well may have been Mary's house, but a fantastic church building that's built over that. In the lower center, you see back the cave that goes into the cave area of Mary's house, and the lower right, you see more caves that are built. The church building is built above the cave area of ancient Nazareth, which was built, houses were built on top of caves. And in the lower left, you see a baptistry there, an early baptistry carved out of the rock. As church after church has been built, tells you that originally the practice of baptism was not sprinkling or pouring, but a baptistry large enough to go down in and be immersed. And so you see a little bit of ancient history of Christianity there in Nazareth. Just to the north, a little bit to the northeast of Nazareth is the city of Sepphoris. Sepphoris was the capital of Herod Agrippa. Agrippa. And Herod Agrippa, it is a wealthy city that was built. There's been supposition, it's just a little walk from Nazareth. Jesus is a carpenter, his dad was a carpenter. Where do you build? There's not much building in Nazareth. Maybe they walked across the valley to come to the hill on which Sepphoris is built and did some work there. There is quite a large archaeological dig there. Josephus referred to it as the ornament of the Galilee. And so you can see in the upper right and left pictures Roman roads. Notice the columns along the sides of the roads. When I say that I didn't see any evidence of a Roman city at what archaeologists are calling Bethsaida, and Josephus said that Philip made that into a Roman city. This is these wide roads with shops on the side, columnways that you see. In the lower right, you see some very intricate mosaics of images. Are they showing up? Well, you can see the deer, the leopard attacking the deer here, and in your lower right, did I say lower right? For lower left is where the mosaic is in a house that they've uncovered. You see a Roman theater that was built in the side of the hill. In the very middle is the Mona Lisa of Galilee, a mosaic of a beautiful woman that's in a house there that they found. The lower right-hand side of the mosaic is missing, but beautiful pictures that are done with little bitty pieces of ceramic, and a lot of mosaic that they uncover as they go on. We go on down to Megiddo. Megiddo is in the western part of the Jezreel Valley. There's a mountain range that runs across Israel, and there is a pass just south of Megiddo. And Megiddo is another one of these cities that was built and destroyed and built and destroyed and built and destroyed, and so it becomes high. The book of 2 Kings tells about how Pharaoh Necho, who was a client king of the Assyrians, was going to help the Assyrians when they were fighting against the Medes and the Babylonians up in northern Mesopotamia. And he gathered his army to go and help the Assyrians. It didn't do any good. The Babylonians and Medes won that battle. But he had to go through that pass. Josiah, the king, did not want him crossing his land to go and help. He was against the Assyrians. The Assyrians had taken the northern kingdom off into captivity, and Josiah was against them, and so he took his army up to Megiddo to try and stop the king of Egypt, and got killed. And there at Megiddo, you can see the tell that Megiddo is in the upper left, the pass in the upper right, the city gates. This was one of these cities that Solomon built up, and has the city gates with the 6 rooms on 3 on each side there on top of Megiddo, and the water supply. Just as we saw the water supply at Hatzor, so at Megiddo, you go down and down and down into the tunnel. Actually, you go down and then you tunnel out to the spring. The spring was actually outside the city, and so you go down and then you go a tunnel to get to that. You can walk through that tunnel today. And the word for mountain in Hebrew is Har. So Har Megiddo, Armageddon. The book of Revelation talks about gathering at Armageddon. A lot of battles were fought there at Megiddo because that's where the armies had to go through the pass. You know you were going to find the army there. And so battles were fought there on the plain of Megiddo, right outside of the mount on which the city is built, if you will. Well, you come on down the Jezreel Valley to the east, and you come to the city of Bethshan, or Bethshan, as it's sometimes shortened. It was also called Scythopolis. Just to the west of this city is Mount Gilboa, and that's where Saul was fighting the Philistines Notice that we're almost to the Jordan River. The Philistines had pushed all the way in the north toward the Jordan River. They fought and Saul died there on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines took over the city of Bethshan, which is just a little bit to the east of there. And they hung the bodies of Saul and his sons there on the city walls of Bethshan. The Romans later built a city there just outside of Bethshan. Let's see if I can pronounce that. Sictopolus. So I'm not getting it right. But it's a part of the Decapolis. It's the only part of the Decapolis that's on the west side of the Jordan River. And most of it's on the east side. But here we see the view of Bethshan and the Roman city in the forefront. Bethshan is the tell in the back, and there would have been walls on the side where the bodies of Saul were placed. The men of Jabesh Gilead marched through all night, rescued those bodies, and took them and buried them at Jabesh Gilead on the other side of the river, because Saul had helped to save the people of Jabesh Gilead. And but you see the Roman city with the wide road, the columns on either side. You see the theater there. The entrance in the theater, it's been restored pretty well. A Roman bath in the lower left. A lot of Roman baths around the area. Good baptismal spot, if you will. And then an amphitheater, a round theater on the lower right, one of the few that you can find that's dug out there. We go to Mount Carmel, which is on the coast. The city of Haifa is there. This is where the battle between God and Baal, Elijah and the prophets of Baal took place. Overlooks the Mediterranean Sea. You can see from the top of it the Mediterranean Sea, the city of Haifa out below. And it's a long mountain. It goes into Israel a good bit. You can see that in the lower left. And then looking down in the lower right, the Baha'i people have built a shrine there on Mount Carmel. That's strange. And then finally, we want to look at Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea by the sea. Paul was a prisoner in Caesarea for 2 years under Felix and Festus and was kept in the palace of Herod. Herod had a nice palace there. You see the ruins of his palace in the upper left. The swimming pool that goes out into the Mediterranean Sea in the upper right. Herod had a swimming pool built in there. The theater and the bay that's there. Right next to his palace is a hippodrome where you raced horses, and you can see that. A Roman street in the lower left, aqueduct that brought water down to Caesarea in the lower right. He built a harbor. The Romans invented concrete that hardens underwater. And he built a harbor there. In the lower right, you see the docks, but it's filled in. All that green grass is used to be harbor, but it's silted up over the years as the harbor's no longer used. And in the lower right, you see a temple that he built to Caesar. And then you see the Mediterranean Sea out to the side. The beautiful Mediterranean Sea there. So I've run over just about 5 minutes, but that is northern Israel. I hope that you learned something by going through northern Israel with me.